Hi, everyone. So I'm Catherine Stewart, Principal and Team Lead for Economist Impact's Policy and Insights team here in London, and I'm at US Sustainability Week with Emma Stewart, Chief Sustainability Officer at Netflix, Kimberly Bernack, Director of Sustainable Production and Content at NBC Universal, Stacey Hoppe, Vice President of Social Responsibility and Sustainability at Warner Brothers Discovery, and Doug Johnson, Vice President for Emerging Technology Policy at the CTA, to discuss the steps that film studios are taking to reduce their environmental impact and promote sustainability behind the camera, and what they're doing to use their platform to raise awareness and drive change. So, Emma, let's start with you. I think as someone who is an audience member, no one's ever said to me, "Oh, have you seen the next season of Bridgerton? Do you think it was made sustainably?" When did this whole push towards sustainability actually start within the industry?
The industry has been focused on sustainability for quite a while, actually long before I entered the industry. So I'll defer to my friends Kim and Stacey to speak to the longer history. But really, in the past few years, there's been a realization that of the environmental issues that companies contend with and that pose risks to their companies that investors raise with our industry, it's become clear that the most material of those issues is climate. At the same time, the expectations across every industry for action on climate have risen on a seemingly daily basis. And so the industry has really banded or rallied around setting science-aligned climate targets and steadily chipping away at the emissions associated with the making of film and television, including Bridgerton.
Everyone loves the Bridgerton moment. Kim, Stacey, where have you seen, what did you see as the trigger point that actually drove this focus in on sustainability within the industry? Maybe we can start with you, Kim.
Yeah, sure. So this started before my time as well. It started in 2009. I think that was kind of the launching point where all of the studios realized that they have this kind of, first of all, influence. And so they have a lot of eyes on them. And so they had to make sure that, they were creating their content responsibly. And it's a historically very wasteful industry. We're very temporary. It's kind of like, throwing this giant wedding every day for hundreds of people. And so, I think it started with the six major studios coming together, knowledge sharing, realizing they have to kind of create more formalized and synchronous tools because we are working with the same crews and vendors and suppliers. So it just kind of made sense to come together and knowledge share to reduce waste, both kind of in the actual waste diversion space, but then also fuel waste, et cetera. And so since then, we created the Green Production Guide, which is a tool that's available for the entire industry. Because again, we don't only want to do this within our studio space, we want to do this for the entire industry to kind of take these best practices and run with them. And since then, we're now at 13 studios and streamers, and we continue growing and gathering interest from the industry to kind of move the needle faster to kind of meet the moment.
Yeah. And Stacey, Kim mentioned the six kind of studios that came together initially to drive this. Who within the studios was responsible for that? That from your perspective, where was the real nudge to get this going?
Early on, we had a number of people from various groups that were really looking at sustainability. It included studio executives, there were producers, creative talent, as well as physical production executives. So there were a lot of different people that were certainly engaged in this space, but I think to the extent that it is today, it really has a lot to do with some of the information that we have available to us and certainly the collaboration.
Kim, I saw your hand go up. Do you want to add anything to that?
I would just add, Stacey mentioned producers. We did partner very early on with the Producers Guild of America, which I think was a very key partnership in this space because we kind of need the folks on the ground to be excited and kind of invested in this space. So it's been a really lovely partnership, and we're continuing to kind of grow that among the other guilds and unions and filmmaking communities.
I want to come to you, and I know you look at this whole issue from a slightly different perspective, but what progress have you seen made on this front more broadly across the past 10, 15 years?
Well, our history, first of all, of course, with the Consumer Technology Association, we're an organization of many companies, large and small, who themselves, of course, have their own sustainability focus. And we can trace, depending on the program or effort, our work back 3 decades. So environmental sustainability captures quite a lot in our sector. We think, obviously we're a complement to what Emma, Kim, and Stacey have spoken to on the content side. We're providing devices through which and with which you can get that content. And we're also under many of the same pressures and attentions, and we have our own ecosystem as well supporting these initiatives. It may not include guilds or unions, but rather on our side, it includes component suppliers, retailers, distributors, and of course, manufacturers. So we're working across the industry at our organization to try to advance sustainability in a variety of different areas, and that includes energy efficiency, recycling, materials use, chemicals, packaging, and so forth.
And Emma, when you're thinking about the progress made within the kind of studio side itself, especially behind the camera, what are you seeing? Where do you think the big strides have been made?
Well, I think you look back in history at examples like the switch to LED lighting, which were actually advocated for from the practitioners because you had a better photographic experience. You also had these side benefits, like you weren't creating excess heat that melted the makeup of the cast. And then the studio and facilities teams loved it because it saved them money. So that's an example of when a technology is just outperforming a less efficient or dirtier technology. You can see that switch come from many different advocates. We're starting to see that now with scrutiny around diesel generators, which have been the traditional means of bringing in power for productions, not just on location, as you might expect, but also on set in studios. The instinct has been, because the schedule matters deeply and no interruption to shooting can be tolerated, understandably, that there's a lot of auxiliary power, a lot of backup, and sometimes not even taking full advantage of grid power. So we always guide our productions to, first and foremost, look for energy efficiency. Secondly, to look for clean forms of energy, including on the grid. And then lastly, if they need auxiliary power, to examine options like batteries and fuel cells. This past year, we had over 100 successful pilots of those clean mobile power units. So I think we're approaching a cusp at which that will start to become more standard practice. But the supply of that technology isn't yet sufficient nor prevalent in the hundreds of places where we produce. And I'm sure the same is true for my friends at the other studios. So that's an example of how we can look back in history and see these switches happen relatively quickly when a technology is clearly better on many levels. But we're not there yet for these other technologies like mobile power.
Can you give me a sense of the breakdown of where kind of emissions and sustainability challenges come across the industry, just to give us all a perspective, because I'm not sure it's something that the normal audience member is kind of thinking about.
Yeah, I can kind of break down what a film shoot looks like. Basically, there's dozens and dozens of different departments. There's hair, there's makeup, there's props, wardrobe, etc. And they all kind of have their own areas of opportunities to reduce their impact. whether it be reuse, donations, etc. However, the entire industry right now is very focused around the biggest impact, which, to Emma's point, is fuel. A couple of years ago, the studios came together, anonymized our production data, and put out a carbon emissions report, which kind of shared what are the average carbon emissions across film and television production. And almost across the board, it's coming from fuel, from vehicles and generators. And so we kind of already knew that, but it really helped to kind of put the data out there and kind of raise the flag that we need to be partnering with local film offices and getting the infrastructure in place to be able to start kind of electrifying our sets. And so, and working with vendors and suppliers on that, and also working with crews. To Emma's point, LED lighting is something that has to be coming from the gaffers and the lighting teams themselves, not coming from the studios. And so we want to do the same thing when it comes to the vehicles that they're driving, the power that they're generating. We want to work with them to kind of find the solutions that will work for the entire industry.
So, Stacey, outside of the energy needs, and Doug, I've seen your hand come up. I will come back to you. Where are studios now directing their attention as they look forward to think about the next steps in sustainability, the hurdles, the challenges, and how they overcome them?
Yeah, I think one of the best things that we have going for us is that the collaboration. Now, not only the collaboration within our industry, within the studios represented by 3 here, but certainly with local governments and other vendors and things like that really can help push the needle when it comes to the things that we are not solely able to do ourselves. So whether it's working with cities to find opportunities to plug into grids, clean grids, hopefully as well, that will eliminate the use of fuel of any kind. But I think the collaboration is really something that is incredibly important as we're looking at that. In addition to what we can do on set, I think the facilities that we are filming in is something that's incredibly important as well. We have, at Warner Brothers Discovery, we have 2 kind of very big studio facilities, both of which are really looking at how can we include renewable energy, how can we bring things like LED set lighting to the facility so that any production, whether it's ours or others, have the ability to tap into some of that clean tech that Emma and Kim have mentioned. So it's really working together and identifying where those opportunities are. It's not always just right in front of you, but it certainly extends into other areas as well.
Thank you. Doug, let's come back to you before we dig in a bit more on Stacey's point.
Sure. I just wanted to pick up on what Emma and Kim mentioned a moment ago about lighting, and it shouldn't be understated at all, the importance of the transition to more efficient forms of lighting like LEDs. It's clearly made a difference on the movie set, but it's also made a difference in the home theater, if you will, with the consumer viewing experience on flat screens. The transition to LED lighting made a huge difference over the way you produce pictures on a CRT or cathode ray tube years ago. So the clean energy transition is macro and micro, but you can see it throughout the value chain of entertainment for sure.
Kim, let's come back over to you because Stacey started this point on collaboration and the role it has to play in pushing this agenda forward. Where are you seeing real points of successful collaboration? Where are you seeing focus on future points of collaboration? And where maybe haven't we gotten to yet on any collaboration at all?
That's a good question. I think, to kind of reiterate what we mentioned earlier, I think there's the obvious studio collaboration. We talk every day. We have subcommittees talking about clean energy and carbon reporting and waste, et cetera. And kind of collaborating. For me, over the last year or 2, I have also been collaborating internally with people who are not involved in sustainability. And so because I think that that's kind of the key to the overall success is really educating and partnering with everyone, and kind of embedding sustainability into the entire process. And so really collaborating with the filmmakers directly, the directors, the talent, the creative executives, production executives, because ultimately we want sustainability to be thought of kind of prior to once the entire plan and schedule is already set. And so I think it's really important to continue that collaboration both internally and with the people on the ground. I think that where I see a lot of opportunity for collaboration is continuing to work with local film offices and governments to get that infrastructure in place for productions. And to Stacey's point, when we're filming in facilities, we have to partner with those facilities now so that when we choose a stage to film in, it's already kind of set up for us. We're not kind of having these conversations over and over again. And so I think it's kind of all hands on deck.
And let me ask the sort of $1 million question to the statement you just said, which is how bought in are all of these different stakeholders internally to pushing this sustainability agenda, especially relative to perhaps other agendas, making sure you're producing something that becomes a hit, et cetera? What are you seeing in those dynamics right now?
Just because I don't think there's anyone who denies that climate change is real and it is here. There are certainly conversations that we have in order to better help connect the dots or understand what some of those pain points are from some of these groups. So whether it's in the physical production side, whether it's, the creative team, et cetera. But I think everyone is really coming to the table in ways that we probably didn't see, even 5 years ago, let alone when all of this started. So I think it's really encouraging, both from the physical production side, but, as Kim mentioned, this collaboration, groups that handle grip or, set lighting, even in filmmakers, they know their craft best. And so, we as partners to them can help bring them along, but ultimately we need them in order to make this successful.
Emma, Kim mentioned earlier that there's local film offices that you're working with on these issues. To what extent is this a U.S. issue being driven by U.S. studios, U.S. filmmakers, or is this a trend you're seeing around the world, no matter where the studios, the production companies are located?
It's a global trend. Arguably, one of the earliest movers was the British Film and Television Academy, BAFTA, who, with the help of BBC, founded a sustainability industry initiative over 10 years ago and has been going strong ever since. But we hear from our productions in every region. There's, of course, regional flavor. So in some places, there's tons of electric vehicles available. In others, zero. In some places, the grid is really clean. In others, very carbon intensive. In some places, these clean mobile power alternatives to diesel generators are already accepted by crew, and the productions are saying, you know what? This is a better operational experience. It's quiet. I can put it anywhere. I don't have to cable hundreds of yards or feet to get it to a place where it's not interrupting my audio. And in other places, no one's ever heard of battery or fuel cell power. So as with all societal and economy-wide transitions, it is a patchwork of progress. But I think the instinct there, the impulse, is universal. And because you're starting to see this now crop up in regulatory conversations, even the regions where it hasn't been as salient from an investor or a consumer standpoint, companies are taking notice because they will be put on notice to at least disclose their progress, if not make progress.
So that's really interesting because I think one of the biggest pain points I've heard in all of the conversations I've had at our various sustainability weeks is that, first of all, standardization across countries is really challenging, and how that manifests in terms of the training of workers, et cetera, can be really difficult. So when you're dealing with kind of cross-country productions, how do you deal with that, Kim?
It's a challenge. I think, to your point, we are having to oftentimes build different tools and different languages, and we kind of have to adapt these practices, especially to Emma's point, based on what's available in their local city in which they're filming. And so it's a challenge for sure. However, I think my first point of kind of suggestion when I talk to film offices is for them to talk to each other just as the studios do. So, when London has already had all of the success in terms of putting in grid power to local popular shooting locations or building tools, then they should go talk to Vancouver, where we shoot very often, and kind of talk about what are the best practices, what are the successes, challenges, so that we can kind of all start speaking the same language. No pun intended. I think that's always kind of my approach, is to make sure that everyone's talking to each other, because we need to kind of just knowledge share in order to kind of move the needle faster.
Doug, you obviously, again, have a totally different set of challenges, hurdles, priorities. How do those align with what we've heard from Stacy and Kim and Emma, and where do they really differ? What does that look like for you?
So it's not dissimilar. We're looking at environmental sustainability as an industry globally. We have to act at different levels of government, of course. Many of the same questions are presented to us by policymakers at those different levels of government, local, national, international. And as Stacy mentioned a few minutes ago, collaboration is key to success in environmental sustainability, as so many other fields. So it's important for us to confront challenges as an industry that sells products globally, to ensure alignment of best practices and policies wherever possible. Easier said than done, of course, but I'm talking about things as mundane as ways you measure energy use standard, getting alignment around those standards globally, ways to disclose information to the buying public, to the consumer, labels and e-labels and that sort of approach. So there are plenty of opportunities to take some of the friction out of the process, while at the same time advancing sustainability and presenting these choices and information to consumers. But again, it depends on collaboration within and outside of our industry, much like you've heard from the studio side.
So we spent a lot of time talking about the kind of behind screen. I suspect everyone is thinking about the power that your industry has to inspire change on the screen. It's sort of like, the world of everyone learned to drink Taittinger champagne because James Bond did type of thing. Where are you in that process of trying to drive better sustainability from the screen? Stacy, I don't know if you want to start us off there.
Sure. Yeah. I think it's really been an interesting look at this too. Discovery, I think its first program in 1985 was Iceberg Alley, and it was a documentary looking at the impact of the melting snow caps. So years ago, you could see some of this show up in documentaries and news and things like that. But now we're seeing a lot more opportunity with scripted content and other content that we all produce as well. But I think, people recognize that this is part of climate change, is part of lives. This is what's happening in real life. It's not science fiction. And so to weave those kinds of storylines or positive behaviors into scripted content is something that we are seeing a lot more of. And it has a lot to do with people recognizing that this is, again, a problem, but also real life. There are also some great organizations that are taking note of this that our creatives can tap into. So if they have, they want to expand on a storyline, there are organizations that really focus on the kind of messaging and content that can be influenced as part of this. So it's really encouraging as things move forward and seeing different kinds of content address climate change.
And to what degree, Kim, do you see again, a coalescing behind the desire to put more content on screen that does address sustainability issues in some way, shape, or form.
I think so. This is something, we've talked about how long the studios have been talking about behind the scenes, but this is something that's kind of fairly new, despite some kind of climate focused content. This is kind of new in terms of us talking directly with creatives and writers about this. And I would give a lot of credit to the amazing work that's being done in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? We have this content and we have to make sure that we are responsible with it. We also have to recognize that we have this opportunity as an industry to make seismic shifts in behavior for the better, and kind of really, really educate and inspire and motivate our audiences to be more sustainable and to change behaviors. And so for us, I would say the doors have opened a lot more quickly in the last couple of years. People understand the responsibility and the influence that they have. And so we are getting in, as early as when the story comes into our studio. We're having conversations around what are the opportunities, whether it be a film or a TV show about climate change, all the way to what are the kind of small behaviors that our characters are doing, like what are they driving, what are they drinking out of, et cetera. And so we're finding that those doors are opening, and to Stacey's point, there's a lot of organizations that are creating dedicated branches around this because they realized the power that media can have.
Stacey, when you're thinking about this, how do you, is there a specific type of audience that you're kind of trying to attract? Like, one could imagine teaching children how to recycle when they're small through a children's television program is probably an easier thing to do than to shift behaviors of older audiences. Have you found particular pieces of success or areas where it's perhaps easier to integrate this type of content into your storytelling?
Yeah, I think, there's different ways of approaching this. There's obviously, whether it's film or series, things that are really kind of focused on sustainability and climate change as it relates to the entire storyline, which is great. There's certainly opportunities there, but the opportunities to really kind of infuse it within a character that cares about climate change, or ways that it is kind of sprinkled throughout a series over the course of a season, has, the very different impact than, sometimes the whole story being about climate change. So, we've seen several shows that are approaching it in that way, really kind of driving climate change through a character, someone that people already have related to or can relate to. And so it's really kind of, I think, changing in ways that it's no longer doom and gloom prospect as it relates to inclusion in storytelling, but it's about everyday lives. And I think that is really can reach people in different ways than the fear that you kind of come away with when it's really looking at kind of the negative aspects of story.
So I can give some examples just to illustrate Kim and Stacey's points. We love data, and so we looked back at which of the titles on our slate arguably have a green premise or some form of green character or contribution subplot. And we found that in 2022, 70% of our members chose to watch at least one of those titles, which is a very high number and a very good indication of interest and appetite. And then that was confirmed by third-party audience research. And I think what's interesting there is that they're not necessarily crying out for more documentaries, as Stacey was saying. The variety of ways in which this is showing up creatively and authentically, and then the volume of titles where creators are seeking to better represent these issues on screen is what's changed. So an example of that is Sea Beast, which is an animated film that was actually our top animated film last year, our top animated film of all time. And in that, the main character, this little girl, I won't spoil it for you, but there's a very strong conservation ethic throughout, in which she protects what have been unfairly vilified sea creatures. And at the end, there's a big reveal about why they've been unfairly vilified. It's not earnest. It's not hitting you on the head with guilt-inducing conservation facts and figures. It's a beautiful and poignant story about a little girl and her relationship with these sea beasts. So that performed beautifully for us from a commercial standpoint, and also had this conservation ethic throughout. Another example on the TV side is an Emmy Award-winning series called Down to Earth with Zac Efron, where he travels the world and effectively highlights local sustainability solutions and eco-entrepreneurs, making it incredibly hip, incredibly cool, incredibly appealing. And there's a lot of food. It's very immersive. It's just like any other travel show, except it happens to be about the positive lens on sustainability, which has so often been portrayed as dystopia or negative. So there's lots of good examples of where creators are doing this well, and where they want to, we are supporting them as a sounding board with fact checking, with creative consultations, so that they can really exploit the creative opportunity associated with this change in society.
And Kim, just to kind of round out three perspectives, does that align with what you're seeing as well from your side?
Yeah, definitely. I think we recently, earlier this year, launched a program called the Greener Light Program, where it's essentially looking kind of throughout the entire filmmaking process, again, when the script comes into the studio. And so we have kind of been welcomed with open arms. We're having conversations with our writers and our creative executives to kind of have these kind of open conversations. And it's very much starting with education, because I think a lot of folks are very open to talking about this. They just don't understand or kind of wrap their heads around, well, my movie's not about the climate, so I don't think there's much I can do about it. And so it's really just kind of having those initial educational conversations about the opportunities. For instance, a director came to us because she wanted to know what the world would look like 100 years from now. And so we worked with our partners at NRDC to kind of put together a memo of different things that they would predict the world would look like when it comes to agriculture and human health and things like that. And so I think there's a wide variety of opportunities. And I would also say we're not just constricted to the 2-hour window of a movie or the 30-minute window of a TV show. There's digital media, there's talent opportunities. You know, these talent that we work with have great influence and loud voices. And so when they can kind of speak to scientists or support climate organizations more vocally, that can kind of raise the opportunity to enhance their work. So it's really just finding the opportunities as a entertainment industry as a whole.
This is a really good transition. We won't look 100 years forward, because I don't think any of us can actually predict that, although maybe Kim can now. But looking 5, 10 years forward, I want to give each of you the opportunity to kind of give me your vision for what you'd like to see both the film industry, but also the consumer tech industry to look like in terms of your sustainability, both behind the camera and in front of the camera. Doug, let's start with you as the totally different perspective.
So all this creative content developed sustainably, of course, many cases will end up on a screen in a home. And oftentimes that's a TV screen. And one of the most exciting things that we've done recently in that regard has to do with energy again, but an energy efficiency voluntary agreement for televisions, which was launched at our trade show CS back in January, includes all the major manufacturers of televisions in North America. And also NRDC, as Kimberly mentioned a minute ago, is a partner along with ACEEE, the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy. And so going forward, looking a few years into the future, I'm certainly looking forward to the results of that initiative, which is designed to to achieve greater efficiencies in today's televisions, which, of course, as you know, constantly evolve, incorporate new features and functions to deliver that movie or that TV show in amazing ways on the screen. But that takes a lot of technical work. It takes investments at the component level and software level nowadays with televisions. And so very much in the next few years, we should expect to see the returns on this initiative, the savings to the consumer ultimately in terms of electricity cost.
Emma, what about you?
I think behind the camera, you'll see quite a bit of change over the next 5 years. You'll see significant electrification. So some of these diesel generators, instead turning to a use of the grid and that grid decarbonizing, we've already seen tipping points in wind and solar, new generation surpassing that of coal. You'll also see electric vehicles showing up significantly behind the camera, but also on screen. In February, we announced our commitment to include at least one electric vehicle in all Netflix-produced shows and television moving forward. We started that last year. And so you can play bingo with your friends and find those EVs in those productions. And because transportation is electrifying so quickly, we've again passed a tipping point there in terms of new car sales. We will have fewer issues trying to source those EVs, both for production purposes and for on-screen, what are called picture cars. I think you'll also see, I mentioned the 100 pilots we've done with clean mobile power options in lieu of diesel generators. I think you'll see a dramatic scaling, I hope, in the supply of those. And we're working with both our peer studios and suppliers to ensure that in fact manifests. And then on screen, I think you'll see, again, this volume and variety of our changing climate and clean economy reflected on screen. We currently have a collection of already 200 television shows and films in our Sustainability Stories collection. So I anticipate that would grow substantially and would diversify even more across all of the genres. That's my crystal ball gazing for today.
Kim?
Okay, so I think Emma covered kind of the electrifying and the infrastructure changes. So I will kind of take it to the creative elements, and I foresee there being kind of shifts in terms of we've made movies and TV for like this for so long. We rent this amount of trucks, we rent this amount of generators, we travel to different locations to scout, we film in multiple locations. And what I think there's an opportunity for is just efficiency as a whole. And so really thinking about it in the creative planning process when you're deciding where to film and how many locations to film. And so I'm kind of hopeful that there's going to be an opportunity for just less of everything and still making the quality content that we've been making for all these years. There's also kind of virtual production. There's going to be different opportunities to not have to move around as much. And my other hope or kind of, vision is that our jobs will start to go away. I think that for the next few years that we're now finding the solutions, but then eventually every job is going to have to, be a sustainability job. And so, kind of we're setting the tone and the kind of infrastructure for that right now. But the hope is that, at a certain point, this will just be kind of ingrained in the industry.
And Stacey, the final word is yours.
Well, I think just to sum up what everyone said here, there is hope that there is, a really easy infrastructure in which production can exist to do what we are aiming to do here. So whether that's technology, as Emma said, that's coming along nicely. Hopefully we'll see more of that and even cleaner options there. As Kim mentioned, with creative content and on screen, more information about how we can weave those into stories. But really, I think what we are trying to accomplish and do every day. It's about education, not only the audiences that see our content, but it's education behind the scenes in order to really make this all happen. So I think, it all goes back to just continuing to have these conversations, building even bigger networks, not only within our companies, but also across industries and across groups. It's great that Doug is here today, to tell that side of the story. So, but I think, again, the education that we have been doing and continue to do will help really bring that infrastructure to a place where I hope we don't have jobs. And, I don't know about 5 years, but certainly much more down the road.
Doug, Stacy, Kim, Emma, thank you so much. I suspect every single person who watches this will go home and start looking to see if they can spot sustainability characters. And I challenge anyone when season 3 of Bridgerton comes out to figure out where the EV is in that one, because I will certainly be watching. So thank you all. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And thank you for a wonderful conversation.